The biting winter air cut through Ruby Thompson's threadbare coat as she hurried down Black Hawk's frozen Main Street, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. December 1876 had brought the harshest cold Colorado had seen in years, and Ruby was already late for her first job of the day. At 23, she wore exhaustion like a second skin, the weight of 3 jobs and a mountain of debt threatening to crush what little spirit she had left. Ruby pulled her coat tighter against the biting wind. The mining town of Black Hawk had once promised opportunity, but after her father's death 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but his outstanding debts and their small cabin on the edge of town, opportunity had become a cruel joke. Her mother had passed when Ruby was just 16, and now, completely alone, she was working herself to the bone just to keep a roof over her head and food in her stomach. The saloon was already bustling when Ruby slipped through the back door. Even at 5 in the morning, a few determined gamblers remained from the previous night, bleary-eyed and slumped over cards. "You're late, girl," Howard Finch, the saloon owner, barked as Ruby tied an apron around her waist. His permanently red face seemed even more flush than usual as he pointed to the mess left from the previous night. "Tables need clearing and floors need sweeping before the morning crowd arrives." "Yes, Mr. Finch. Sorry, Mr. Finch," Ruby mumbled, grabbing a broom. Her fingers were still numb from the walk, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. The morning cleaning shift at the saloon was the first of her 3 jobs, followed by afternoon work at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house and evening shifts at the town's busy general store. Ruby moved quickly between tables, collecting abandoned glasses and wiping away spills. Her back already ached, and the day had barely begun. As she worked, the saloon door swung open, bringing with it a blast of frigid air and the imposing figure of a man she'd never seen before. He stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the room from beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanded attention even from the half-drunk gamblers. Ruby couldn't help but stare. His face was weather-beaten but handsome, with a strong jaw partially covered by a short beard. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded Ruby of summer skies, scanned the room before landing on her. "We ain't serving yet," Howard called out, barely looking up from the glasses he was polishing behind the bar. The stranger nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he approached the bar, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "Just looking for some information," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Name's Adam Lawson. I've purchased the old Carlton Ranch outside of town, looking to hire some help." Ruby tried not to listen as she swept, but Adam Lawson's voice carried through the quiet saloon. A new ranch owner meant new opportunities in town, maybe even new customers for the businesses where she worked. But it meant nothing to her personally. She had no time for anything beyond her 3 jobs, especially not with winter settling in. "Good luck finding willing workers," Howard snorted. "Most able-bodied men are either in the mines or left for better prospects. Carlton let that place go to ruin before he sold up. Heard the house is barely standing." Adam shrugged off the discouragement. "I've turned around worse. Plan to make it the most productive cattle ranch in the county by spring." His confidence wasn't boastful, just matter of fact, as though success was the only possible outcome. Ruby accidentally knocked over a chair as she swept, drawing the attention of both men. She quickly righted it, feeling her cheeks flush under Adam's gaze. "Sorry to disturb," she mumbled. "No harm done," Adam replied with a small nod. "Miss Thompson." "Ruby Thompson," she answered, surprised by his politeness. Most men in Black Hawk either ignored her completely or paid attention in ways that made her uncomfortable. Howard interrupted with a grunt. "Girl's my morning help. Also works for Mrs. Wilson and over at Peterson's store. Regular workhorse, this one." Adam raised an eyebrow. "3 jobs." "That's quite a commitment, Miss Thompson." Ruby bristled slightly at the surprise in his voice. "Some of us don't have the luxury of choice, Mr. Lawson." Instead of taking offense, Adam's mouth quirked into a small smile. "Fair point." He tipped his hat slightly before turning back to Howard to continue their conversation. By 7 o'clock, Ruby had finished cleaning the saloon and helped set up for the morning customers. Her hands were raw from scrubbing tables, and her first pay of the day, a few meager coins, weighed almost nothing in her pocket. She hurried out the back door, needing to return to her cabin to change before heading to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house by 8. The sun was finally up, but it provided little warmth against the December chill. Ruby wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck and quickened her pace. She was so focused on not slipping on the icy ground that she didn't notice Adam Lawson until she nearly collided with him outside the general store. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You're moving like there's a fire chasing you." Ruby stepped back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson. I need to get home and back to my next job." Adam studied her face for a moment, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "3 jobs through winter," he said, more to himself than to her. "Must be difficult." "I manage," Ruby replied stiffly, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "If you'll excuse me." "Actually, Miss Thompson," Adam said as she turned to leave, "I wonder if I might make a proposition." Ruby tensed immediately, having heard those exact words from too many men with dishonorable intentions. Her expression must have revealed her thoughts because Adam quickly clarified. "A business proposition," he specified. "As I mentioned in the saloon, I need help at my ranch. The work is varied, some cooking, record-keeping, general upkeep. I'm willing to pay more than your 3 current jobs combined." Ruby stared at him incredulously. "Why would you offer that to someone you just met?" "I'm a good judge of character," Adam replied simply. "Howard said you're reliable, and I can see you're not afraid of hard work. The ranch is isolated, especially in winter, but there's a separate cabin for you, solid meals, and as I said, good pay." Ruby hesitated. It sounded too good to be true, and in her experience, such offers usually were. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Lawson, but I don't know anything about ranch work." "You can learn," he said with confidence. "I need someone starting tomorrow. Think about it. I'll be at the hotel until this afternoon if you decide to accept." He tipped his hat again and continued on his way, leaving Ruby standing speechless in the cold. Throughout her shift at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, Ruby couldn't stop thinking about Adam Lawson's offer. She changed sheets, swept floors, and prepared rooms for new guests, while her mind calculated and recalculated her current earnings against what a single job might provide. Her 3rd job at the general store was the most tiring, keeping her on her feet until after 9 each night. By the time she returned home each day, she barely had energy to eat before falling into exhausted sleep. "You're distracted today," Mrs. Wilson observed as Ruby nearly put sugar instead of salt into the lunch stew. The older woman was stern but fair and had been kind to Ruby after her father's passing. "I'm sorry, madam. I received an unexpected job offer this morning." Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, from whom?" "A Mr. Lawson. He's purchased the Carlton Ranch and needs help." "Adam Lawson, Mrs." Wilson looked surprised. "He stopped by yesterday asking about reliable workers. I mentioned you, actually." Ruby nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. "You did? Don't look so shocked, girl. You're the hardest worker in town, and that man was offering good wages." Mrs. Wilson stirred the stew thoughtfully. The Carlton place is remote, but Lawson seems decent enough. Better than running yourself into the ground with 3 jobs. But what about my work here? And at the store and saloon? Mrs. Wilson waved her hand dismissively. There are other girls in town looking for work. Not as good as you, mind, but we'll manage. Her expression softened slightly. Ruby, you've been working yourself to death since your father passed. Sometimes an opportunity comes along that's worth taking a risk for. By the time Ruby finished her shift at Mrs. Wilson's, she had made up her mind to at least hear more details about Adam Lawson's offer. She had just enough time to visit the hotel before heading to the general store for her evening shift. The hotel lobby was warm and welcoming after the cold outside. Ruby asked the clerk about Mr. Lawson and was directed to the small restaurant attached to the hotel. She found him sitting alone at a corner table, papers spread out before him as he ate a late lunch. Adam looked up as she approached, a flash of surprise crossing his features before he stood politely. "Miss Thompson, please join me." Ruby sat stiffly, feeling out of place in her work clothes among the hotel's more refined guests. "I wanted to ask more about your job offer before I make any decisions." Adam nodded and cleared away his papers. "Of course. As I mentioned, the work is varied. The main house needs significant repair, which I'll handle, but I need someone to keep things in order, cooking, cleaning, helping with ranch accounts. Once spring comes, there will be more hands hired for the cattle, but for winter, it would just be the 2 of us." Ruby frowned slightly. "Just the 2 of us, that seems improper," Adam finished with a small smile. "There's a separate cabin for you, as I mentioned. Your reputation would remain intact." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Thompson, I won't pretend the work will be easy, but it will be better than exhausting yourself with 3 separate jobs. I'll pay you $30 a month, plus room and board." Ruby couldn't hide her shock. $30 was more than she made from all 3 jobs combined, and without the expense of feeding herself or maintaining her father's cabin. "That's very generous," she said cautiously. "It's fair payment for good work," Adam countered. "I need someone reliable, and from what I've gathered, you're the most hard-working person in Black Hawk." Ruby hesitated, weighing her options. Working for a man she barely knew, miles from town, was risky. But continuing as she was meant certain exhaustion, possible illness, and still barely scraping by. "I would need to settle things here first," she said finally. "Pay some of my father's debts, make arrangements for the cabin." Adam nodded. "I understand. I plan to head back to the ranch tomorrow morning. I can give you an advance on your first month's wages to help settle your affairs, if that would help your decision." The offer was too tempting to refuse. With an advance, Ruby could pay off her most pressing debts and perhaps even hire someone to watch over her father's cabin until spring. "I accept your offer, Mr. Lawson," she said, hardly believing the words coming from her own mouth. "But I insist on keeping our arrangement strictly professional." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Adam replied, extending his hand to seal their agreement. "We'll leave tomorrow at 9. I'll meet you here with the wagon." As Ruby shook his hand, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake or taking the first step toward a better life. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Ruby had spent her final evening shift at the general store explaining her sudden departure to a disgruntled Mr. Peterson. She'd then stayed up late packing her meager belongings and using Adam's advance to pay her most urgent debts. She'd also arranged for Mrs. Wilson's son to check on her cabin periodically through winter. At precisely 9 o'clock, Ruby waited outside the hotel with her single trunk, wrapped in every layer she owned. Adam arrived promptly with a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Good morning, Miss Thompson. Ready for your new position?" Ruby nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "As ready as I'll ever be." Adam loaded her trunk into the wagon with ease, then helped her onto the seat beside him. The ride out of town was quiet, with Ruby taking a last look at the place that had been her home her entire life. Black Hawk grew smaller behind them as Adam guided the horses onto the road leading into the foothills. "The ranch is about 10 miles out," Adam explained as they traveled. Carlton's named it Silverpine, for the view of pine trees on the silver-colored ridge behind the property. It's good land, with a creek that doesn't freeze completely even in winter. The house needs work, but it's sound. Ruby listened as Adam described his plans for the ranch, rebuilding fences, repairing outbuildings, and preparing for a herd of cattle to be brought up from Texas in the spring. His obvious passion for the work was infectious, and despite her apprehension, Ruby found herself intrigued by the challenge ahead. The journey took nearly 3 hours, with the wagon moving slowly over the snow-covered road. By the time they crested the final hill overlooking Silverpine Ranch, Ruby was chilled to the bone despite her layers. The property spread out below them in a natural valley, sheltered on 3 sides by pine-covered hills. A 2-story farmhouse stood in the center, looking weathered but sturdy. Several outbuildings, including a barn, stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse, were scattered nearby. Off to one side stood a small cabin, presumably Ruby's new home. "It's larger than I expected," Ruby commented as they descended toward the ranch. "Nearly 500 acres," Adam replied with pride. "Most of it pasture-land for the cattle. The previous owner let it go to waste, but the bones of a good ranch are here." As they drew closer, Ruby could see the details Howard had mentioned: broken windows in the main house, a sagging porch, and fences in disrepair. Yet there was something promising about the place, a sense of potential waiting to be realized. Adam pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "I'll show you to your cabin first so you can get settled. There's a stove already stocked with firewood, so you can warm up while I unload the supplies I purchased in town." The cabin was small but clean, with a single room containing a bed, table, 2 chairs, a small dresser, and a pot-bellied stove. A shelf held basic cooking implements, and there was a washstand in one corner. It was simple but far more comfortable than Ruby had expected. "It's very nice," she said, genuinely pleased. "The outhouse is just behind," Adam explained, "and there's a pump for water by the main house. Once you're settled, come over and we can discuss your duties in more detail." Left alone, Ruby quickly lit the stove and unpacked her trunk. The cabin warmed quickly, and for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. The work would be hard, but perhaps here, away from the constant pressure of 3 jobs and her father's creditors, she might find some peace. An hour later, warmer and more composed, Ruby made her way to the main house. The interior was dusty but well built, with a large kitchen, dining room, sitting room, and what appeared to be an office on the first floor. Adam had already started a fire in the kitchen stove and was unpacking supplies onto the table. "This kitchen will be your domain," he said as she entered. "I'm not much of a cook beyond coffee and basic fare. The pantry's stocked with essentials, and there's a root cellar outside with preserved vegetables from the previous summer." Ruby surveyed the kitchen with a professional eye. It needed a thorough cleaning, but the large cast iron stove was in good condition, and the workspace was ample. "I can manage this," she said, already mentally organizing how she would arrange things. "Good," Adam nodded. "Beyond cooking and keeping the house in order, I'll need help with record keeping. Can you read and write?" "Yes," Ruby replied, slightly offended by the question. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She made sure I received a proper education. Adam looked pleased. That's excellent. The previous owner left the ranch accounts in disarray. I'll need help organizing them and tracking expenses as we rebuild. They spent the rest of the afternoon establishing Ruby's duties and schedule. She would prepare 3 meals daily, clean the main house, assist with accounts, and help with minor repairs and tasks as needed. In exchange, she would have her own cabin, meals, 1 day off per week, and the promised $30 monthly by evening. Ruby was exhausted but more optimistic than she'd felt in months. As she returned to her cabin with a plate of food, Adam had insisted on preparing a simple but filling stew. She reflected on the strange turn her life had taken in just 2 days. Yesterday, she'd been a woman drowning in responsibility and debt. Today, she was still facing hard work, but with a clear purpose and the promise of better compensation. As the days passed, Ruby and Adam fell into a comfortable routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the main house, afternoons helping with accounts or assisting Adam with minor repairs, and evenings cooking dinner before retiring to her cabin. The isolation that had concerned her initially proved to be a blessing. Without the constant pressure of town life and multiple jobs, she found herself regaining strength and even putting on a little of the weight she'd lost during her difficult months after her father's death. Adam proved to be a fair employer, never asking more of her than she could reasonably accomplish and always expressing gratitude for her efforts. He worked from dawn until dusk on the endless repairs the ranch required, only stopping when Ruby called him for meals. During those shared meals, they gradually began to learn more about each other. "How did you come to buy a ranch in Colorado?" Ruby asked one evening as they ate dinner in the newly cleaned dining room. "Your accent suggests you're not from around here." Adam smiled slightly. "Born in Texas. Spent most of my life working cattle ranches there, starting as a hand and working my way up to foreman. Saved every penny I could. When I heard about this place being sold at a bargain price, I decided it was time to have something of my own." "It's a big undertaking for one person," Ruby observed. "The best challenges usually are," Adam replied. "What about you? How did you end up working 3 jobs in Black Hawk?" Ruby hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her story. "I was born in Black Hawk. My father worked in the mine until an accident left him with a bad leg. He tried his hand at various businesses after that, but none succeeded. When my mother died 7 years ago, he started drinking heavily. By the time he passed 6 months ago, he'd accumulated significant debts that fell to me to pay." Adam's expression softened with understanding. "That's a heavy burden for someone your age." "I'm 23, Ruby said defensively. "Plenty of women my age have far greater responsibilities." "That wasn't a criticism," Adam clarified. "Just an observation that you've handled adversity with remarkable grace." His compliment caught Ruby off guard, and she busied herself with clearing the table to hide her flushed cheeks. Adam's kind words and respectful treatment were a stark contrast to what she'd grown accustomed to in town, where she was viewed either with pity or as just another working girl struggling to survive. As December gave way to January, the weather worsened. A series of snowstorms isolated the ranch completely, making travel to town impossible. Ruby found herself grateful for the well-stocked pantry and root cellar, though fresh meat became scarce as the game animals retreated deeper into the forest. One particularly brutal morning, with the temperature well below freezing and snow piling against the buildings, Ruby arrived at the main house to find Adam already gone from the property. Concerned, she prepared breakfast anyway, keeping it warm on the stove as she peered anxiously out the windows. The snow was falling so heavily she could barely see the barn. Just as she was considering bundling up to search for him, the kitchen door burst open, bringing with it a blast of frigid air and a snow-covered Adam carrying a small deer across his shoulders. "Venison for dinner," he announced, stomping snow from his boots. Had to track it for miles, but worth the effort. Ruby rushed to help him, taking his ice-encrusted coat as he laid the deer on the prepared table in the mudroom. "You could have frozen to death out there. Why didn't you tell me you were going hunting?" Adam looked surprised at her concern. "You were asleep when I left, didn't want to disturb you." "Next time, leave a note," Ruby insisted, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. "I was worried." Something shifted in Adam's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight smile. "I'll remember that," he promised, his voice gentler than usual. That evening, after Adam had butchered the deer and Ruby had prepared a hearty stew with the fresh meat, they sat closer than usual at the dining table, the howling blizzard outside making the warm house seem even more intimate. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Adam asked, helping himself to a second serving. "This is better than anything I've had in years." Ruby smiled, pleased by his appreciation. "My mother taught me the basics. The rest I learned working at the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson is an excellent cook." "Her loss is my gain," Adam said, raising his cup in a small toast. "This ranch hasn't seen a proper home-cooked meal in too long." Ruby found herself studying Adam as he ate. Over the past few weeks, his appearance had changed subtly. He was still ruggedly handsome, but his face had relaxed somewhat, the permanent furrow between his brows less pronounced. His blue eyes seemed brighter, especially when he spoke of his plans for the ranch. "You truly love this place already, don't you?" she observed. Adam glanced up, seeming to consider her question seriously. "I love what it can become," he answered finally. "A man needs something that's his own, something he's built with his own hands. Even if it means facing a Colorado winter alone in the middle of nowhere," Ruby asked with a small smile. "I'm not alone," Adam replied, his eyes meeting hers. "I have you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Ruby busied herself with her food, trying to ignore the sudden flutter in her chest. The blizzard lasted 3 days, during which Ruby and Adam were confined to the ranch buildings. They spent the time productively, Adam repairing furniture and fixtures inside the house, Ruby organizing the pantry and thoroughly cleaning rooms that had been neglected. They worked comfortably together, developing an unspoken rhythm that required few words. By the time the storm cleared, leaving the landscape transformed into a pristine white expanse, Ruby realized with some surprise that she hadn't once missed town or regretted her decision to accept Adam's offer. In fact, she'd found more contentment at Silverpine in a few weeks than she'd experienced in years. The peaceful routine was interrupted one crisp, late January morning, when Adam announced he needed to make a trip to town for supplies. "The main road should be passable by now," he explained as they finished breakfast. "We're running low on flour, sugar, and coffee. I should check on mail as well." Ruby nodded, ignoring a strange pang of disappointment at the thought of spending the day alone. "Will you return by evening?" "Should be back before dark," Adam assured her. "Unless another storm blows in. If that happens, I'll stay at the hotel rather than risk the journey." "Be careful," Ruby said, suddenly anxious. The road to town was treacherous even in good weather. In winter, with snow drifts and icy patches, it could be deadly. Adam paused at the door, seeming to sense her concern. After a moment's hesitation, he crossed back to where she stood and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll be careful," he promised, his voice softer than usual. Look after things while I'm gone." The casual touch sent a jolt through Ruby that she couldn't entirely explain. She watched from the window as Adam hitched the horses to the wagon and drove away, his figure gradually disappearing down the snow-covered road. Left alone for the first time since arriving at Silverpine, Ruby found the house uncomfortably quiet. She busied herself with baking bread and sorting through mending that had accumulated over the past weeks. By midday, restlessness drove her outside to check on the chicken coop. Adam had recently repaired and stocked with a small flock purchased from a neighboring ranch before the worst of winter set in. The hens were content in their shelter, protected from the cold and predators. Ruby gathered a few eggs, pleased by the small sign of productivity amidst the frozen landscape. As she made her way back to the house, a movement at the edge of the property caught her eye. Squinting against the bright snow, Ruby made out the shape of a rider approaching not from the direction of town, but from the hills behind the ranch. Alarm shot through her as she hurried back to the house, wondering who would be visiting when Adam was away. The rider drew closer, and Ruby watched anxiously from the kitchen window. He was a rough-looking man, his horse moving with a tired gait through the deep snow. When he reached the yard, he dismounted stiffly and approached the house. Ruby hesitated, then decided to meet him at the door rather than hiding inside. She grabbed the rifle Adam kept near the kitchen entrance. He'd shown her how to use it, just in case, and opened the door just as the stranger raised his hand to knock. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping the rifle visible but not raised. The man looked surprised to find a woman answering. He was middle-aged with a weathered face and clothes that had seen better days. "Didn't expect anyone to be here," he said, his voice raspy. "Looking for the owner." "Mr. Lawson is in town today," Ruby replied, maintaining her position in the doorway. "I'm his housekeeper. Who's asking for him?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Name's Barton. Jim Barton. Used to work this ranch for old man Carlton before he sold up. Been riding circuit as a hired hand since then." He gestured vaguely toward the hills. "Working at the Morrison place over the ridge, but they're cutting back for winter. Heard Silverpine had a new owner, thought I'd see if there was work." Ruby relaxed slightly. The explanation sounded plausible, and the man's appearance matched his story of a ranch hand down on his luck. "Mr. Lawson should return by evening. You're welcome to wait in the barn if you'd like. I can bring you some coffee and food." Barton nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, madam." "Been a long, cold ride." Ruby directed him to the barn, then returned to the kitchen to prepare a plate of bread, cheese, and cold venison. She added a thermos of hot coffee before carrying it out to the barn, where Barton had already unsaddled his horse and was rubbing it down with straw. "Not much of a barn crew," Barton observed as Ruby set the food on a hay bale. "Just you and Lawson running this place." "For the winter," Ruby explained. "Mr. Lawson plans to hire more hands in spring when he brings in cattle." Barton nodded, eyeing the food hungrily. "Carlton ran about 200 head before things went bad. Good grazing land here when it ain't covered in snow." He took a bite of bread. "How long you been working for Lawson?" "Just since December," Ruby answered, careful not to share too much information with the stranger. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish in the house." As Ruby walked back across the yard, she couldn't shake a slight feeling of unease. Something about Barton's manner seemed off, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Still, it wasn't unusual for ranch hands to seek work, even in winter, and the man had been respectful enough. The afternoon passed slowly. Ruby found herself checking the road for signs of Adam's return more often than necessary. Just as the light began to fade, she heard the sound of wagon wheels on the frozen ground and rushed to the window to see Adam returning, the wagon laden with supplies. Relief washed over her as she hurried outside to meet him. "Welcome back," she called, unable to hide her smile. Everything went well in town. Adam's face, cold, reddened, and tired, brightened at the sight of her. Cold journey, but productive. He jumped down from the wagon and began unhitching the horses. "How were things here?" "Fine, except," Ruby began, then paused as Barton emerged from the barn. "We have a visitor. He says he used to work for Mr. Carlton." Adam turned, his posture immediately tense as he spotted the stranger. Barton approached slowly, hands visible at his sides in a deliberate show of peaceful intentions. "Mr. Lawson, Jim Barton. Worked this spread for 5 years under Carlton." Adam's expression remained guarded as he nodded in greeting. "What brings you to Silverpine, Mr. Barton?" "Looking for work," Barton replied simply. "Been at the Morrison place, but they're cutting back. Heard you bought Silverpine and thought you might need an experienced hand." Adam studied the man for a long moment before responding. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not hiring until spring." Barton's face fell. "Could work for room and board till then. Know this ranch better than most. Could be useful through the winter." Ruby watched the exchange with interest. Adam clearly didn't trust the man, but Barton's offer made practical sense. An extra pair of hands would make the winter repairs progress faster. "There's plenty to eat," Ruby interjected softly. "And the bunkhouse could be made habitable." Adam glanced at her, surprised by her advocacy. After a moment's consideration, he turned back to Barton. "1-week trial, room and board only until spring, then regular wages if things work out." Barton nodded eagerly. "Fair enough, I'll earn my keep." "You can stay in the bunkhouse," Adam directed. "Miss Thompson and I will bring supplies to make it comfortable after we unload the wagon." As they worked together unloading supplies, Adam spoke quietly to Ruby. "I know him by reputation. Was Carlton's foreman before everything fell apart. Some in town say he had a hand in Carlton's downfall, encouraged bad decisions, possibly worse." Ruby frowned. "Should we send him away?" "Better to keep him close where I can watch him," Adam replied. "If he's genuine about wanting work, we can use the help. If not..." He left the implication hanging. The addition of Barton to the ranch altered the dynamic between Ruby and Adam. No longer alone, they maintained a more professional distance in the other man's presence. Barton proved to be a hard worker, helping Adam repair fences and outbuildings despite the cold, but Ruby often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his gaze calculating in a way that made her uncomfortable. A week passed, and Adam extended Barton's stay without comment. The extra help was undeniably useful, allowing repairs to progress faster than Adam could have managed alone. But the easy companionship Ruby and Adam had developed seemed strained now. Their conversations limited to practical matters, when before they had begun to share more personal thoughts and stories. One evening in early February, Ruby was preparing dinner when she overheard Barton and Adam talking on the porch. She moved closer to the window, telling herself she was just checking if they were ready to eat, but in truth, curious about their conversation. "Waste of your talents, if you don't mind me saying," Barton was saying. "Girl like that should be doing woman's work, not helping with ranch accounts. Pretty little thing would be better off finding a husband in town." Adam's response was too low for Ruby to hear clearly, but his tone was dismissive. Barton continued, undeterred. "Just saying, a man in your position needs a proper ranch wife, not a hired girl. There's the widow Jenkins over at Clear Creek. She's got money and connections, could help you expand come spring." Ruby felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. She'd been foolish to think the comfortable rapport between her and Adam might be developing into something more. Clearly, He saw her as nothing but an employee, a fact Barton was now reminding him of. She moved away from the window, focusing on finishing dinner preparation with rigid concentration. When the men came inside, she served the food without meeting Adam's eyes, responding to his attempts at conversation with brief, polite answers. After Barton retired to the bunkhouse, Adam lingered at the table as Ruby cleared the dishes. "Is something wrong?" he asked directly. "You've been quiet all evening." Ruby hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I overheard part of your conversation with Mr. Barton about how I should be finding a husband instead of helping with ranch business." Adam's expression darkened. "Barton doesn't speak for me." "But he makes a valid point, doesn't he?" Ruby pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'm just your hired help. Perhaps my duties should remain appropriately feminine." Adam stood and approached her, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Barton is old-fashioned and narrow-minded. I hired you because you're intelligent and capable. Your gender has nothing to do with it." The intensity in his blue eyes made Ruby's heart beat faster. "Then why have you been so distant since he arrived?" Adam sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Because having him here complicates things. Your reputation, my reputation," Ruby interrupted, confused. "A single woman living on a ranch with 2 unmarried men," Adam explained. "I don't want gossip reaching town that might harm your standing." The explanation was both thoughtful and exasperating. "So you've been cold to protect my reputation?" Ruby shook her head in disbelief. "I think I can manage my own standing, Mr. Lawson." A small smile tugged at the corner of Adam's mouth. "I believe you can. And it's Adam, remember. When it's just us, I'd prefer you used my given name." The tension between them dissolved, replaced by something warmer and more complicated. Ruby nodded, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Adam," she acknowledged softly. The way he looked at her then, with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, but instead he stepped back, maintaining the invisible boundary between employer and employee. "Good night, Ruby," he said, her name sounding different when he spoke it. "I'll see you in the morning." Ruby lay awake in her cabin that night, replaying the conversation and wondering at the strange tension that had developed between them. Adam Lawson had hired her for her work ethic, not her companionship, she reminded herself firmly. Whatever she might be beginning to feel for him was inappropriate and likely one-sided. Yet she couldn't forget the look in his eyes when he'd asked her to use his given name, or the way his voice had softened when speaking to her. Was it possible he felt the same inexplicable pull that she did? February brought slightly milder weather, allowing Adam and Barton to make significant progress on the exterior repairs. Ruby found herself with more time to explore the property as her cleaning duties became less demanding. One crisp afternoon, she decided to follow the creek that ran behind the main house, curious about the property beyond the immediate buildings. The stream wound through a small copse of pines before opening into a natural clearing. To Ruby's surprise, she found a small cabin there, more weathered than the other buildings but still standing. Intrigued, she approached and peered through a grimy window. The interior was dusty, but appeared to have been a home once, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden furniture, and shelves built into the walls. It reminded her of her father's cabin in Black Hawk, simple but with a certain charm. "Carlton's grandfather built it." Adam's voice came from behind her, making her jump. He stood a few yards away, watching her with an unreadable expression. "The first home on Silverpine. Later generations built the main house, but they kept this standing out of respect." Ruby turned to face him. It's lovely in a rustic way, peaceful out here. Adam nodded, moving closer to stand beside her. I found it my first week here. Come inside, the door's not locked. The cabin interior was cold but sheltered from the wind. Adam moved around the space with familiarity, opening shutters to let in more light. I've been meaning to restore it, he explained. Not for use necessarily, but as part of the ranch's history. Ruby ran her hand along a shelf, leaving a trail in the dust. It has good bones, as my father would say, just needs care. Like the rest of Silverpine, Adam agreed. He watched as Ruby explored the small space. I come here sometimes to think. No one knows about it except you now, not even Barton. The fact that he'd shared this private retreat with her felt significant. Ruby looked up to find Adam watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. Why show me? She asked quietly. Adam moved closer, his boots stirring dust from the floor. Because I trust you, he said simply. Because you see Silverpine the way I do, not just as it is, but as it could be. They stood facing each other in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, the small cabin creating an intimacy that the main house never could. Ruby was acutely aware of Adam's presence, his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. Ruby, he began, his voice deeper than usual. I need to say something that may be inappropriate given our arrangement. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Yes. Before Adam could continue, a distant shout broke the moment. They both turned toward the sound, Barton's voice calling Adam's name, urgency clear even at a distance. Adam's expression shifted immediately from personal to professional. Wait here, he instructed before hurrying outside. Ruby followed despite his direction, unwilling to be left behind. They found Barton running toward them through the trees, his face red with exertion. Riders coming, he panted. 4 of them, armed, don't look friendly. Adam's posture changed instantly, tension visible in every line of his body. Get back to the house, he ordered them both. Ruby, stay inside. Barton, grab the rifle from my office and meet me on the porch. Adam, what's happening? Ruby asked, alarmed by his reaction. Probably nothing, he answered, though his expression belied his words. Just a precaution. Go now, please. Ruby hurried back to the main house, fear turning her movements clumsy. She reached the kitchen just as 4 riders entered the yard. From the window, she could see they were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-faced. Adam stood on the porch, outwardly calm but with one hand resting near his holstered pistol. Barton emerged from the house with the rifle, positioning himself slightly behind Adam. The lead rider, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, reined his horse to a stop. This Silverpine Ranch, he called. It is, Adam confirmed. I'm Adam Lawson, the owner. What's your business here? The man dismounted, his movements casual but controlled. Name's Vince Murphy, looking for work. Heard you might be hiring come spring. Adam's stance remained wary. News travels fast. I won't be hiring until April at the earliest. Murphy smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. We're willing to work for room and board till then. Been riding hard. Could use a place to winter. Ruby watched the exchange with growing unease. Something about Murphy and his companions felt dangerous, a predatory quality in their stance, the way their hands hovered near their weapons. I appreciate the offer, Adam replied evenly, but I've already got all the help I need for winter. Murphy's smile faded. That's so. Looks to me like you could use strong backs for all the work this place needs. His gaze swept over the property before landing on the kitchen window where Ruby stood watching. His expression changed, a slow smile spreading across his face. Especially with a lady to impress. Adam shifted position, deliberately blocking Murphy's view of the window. My answer stands. If you're looking for work, try the Morrison place over the ridge. They might have something. Murphy's face hardened. Already tried there. Seems no one's hiring midwinter. He stepped closer to the porch. Thing is, Lawson, we're running low on supplies and money. Need somewhere to stay. The standoff was clear now. These weren't men looking for honest work, but opportunists seeking to intimidate their way into shelter. Ruby's heart raced as she watched Adam stand his ground. I can spare some supplies for your journey, Adam offered, his voice steady. Coffee, flour, maybe some salt pork, but I can't offer you work or lodging. For a tense moment, Ruby thought Murphy might challenge Adam directly. The other riders had spread out slightly, hands resting on weapons. Barton stood rigid beside Adam, the rifle held across his chest. Finally, Murphy gave a curt nod. Appreciate the supplies. We'll make camp by the creek tonight, move on tomorrow. Adam nodded. I'll have them ready in an hour. You can make camp at the south boundary. There's shelter in the pine grove there. Once the riders had moved off toward the designated campsite, Adam entered the kitchen, his expression grim. Ruby could see the tension in his jaw, the alertness in his posture. Who are they? She asked quietly. Trouble, Adam answered simply. Not ranch hands, probably outlaws lying low for winter. He ran a hand through his hair. I need you to stay in the house tonight. Keep your door locked. Are we in danger? Ruby asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Adam's expression softened slightly. Probably not. They're just testing boundaries. I'll give them supplies and send them on their way. He hesitated. But as a precaution, I want you to take this. He removed a small revolver from his belt. Do you know how to use it? Ruby nodded, accepting the weapon. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, insisting that a woman living in the West needed to protect herself. I can handle it. Adam looked relieved. Good. Keep it with you tonight. I'll have Barton watch the bunkhouse side, and I'll keep an eye on the main approach. His hand briefly covered hers where it held the revolver. It's just a precaution, Ruby. Try not to worry. But as darkness fell, worry was all Ruby could do. She prepared a simple dinner, which the men ate quickly before taking up their positions for the night. Adam insisted she stay in the main house rather than returning to her cabin, giving her his room upstairs while he kept watch downstairs. Sleep eluded her as she lay in Adam's bed, the revolver on the nightstand beside her. The room smelled of him leather, pine, and something uniquely Adam. Under different circumstances, being surrounded by his personal space would have been intimate, even thrilling. Instead, fear kept her alert, listening for any sound that might indicate trouble. Just before dawn, Ruby was startled from her restless half-sleep by the sound of voices raised in anger. She grabbed the revolver and moved to the window, peering cautiously outside. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could make out Adam confronting Murphy and his men in the yard. Barton stood a few paces behind, rifle raised. The men appeared to be arguing over horses. The two best from Adam's stable were saddled, with Murphy's hand on the reins. Ruby's breath caught as she realized they were attempting to steal the animals. The confrontation escalated quickly. Murphy drew his pistol, pointing it at Adam, who stood his ground, his own weapon still holstered. Ruby couldn't hear the words exchanged, but the threatening gesture was clear enough. Without conscious thought, Ruby flung open the window. Adam! She called, raising the revolver and aiming it toward Murphy. The sudden appearance of an armed woman at the upstairs window created a moment's distraction enough for Adam to draw his own weapon while Barton steadied his rifle. Drop it, Murphy, Adam commanded, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. You're outnumbered. For a tense moment, Ruby thought Murphy might risk a shootout. Then, with a curse, he lowered his weapon. Just needed better mounts, he called, attempting to sound reasonable. Would have paid you when we could. Take your own horses and the supplies I gave you, Adam replied, his aim unwavering. Ride out now and there won't be trouble. Murphy's eyes flicked between Adam, Barton, and Ruby at the window, calculating his odds. Finally, he nodded to his men. They mounted their own horses, leaving Adam's animals behind. You're making enemies today, Lawson, Murphy warned as he turned his horse. Better enemies than thieves in my home, Adam responded coldly. He and Barton maintained their positions, weapons ready, until the riders disappeared down the road toward the main trail. Only when they were completely out of sight did Adam lower his pistol. He looked up at Ruby, still standing at the window with the revolver in her hand. You can put that away now, he called, a hint of admiration in his voice. They're gone. Ruby's hands shook as she set the weapon down. The rush of fear and adrenaline left her feeling light-headed. She made her way downstairs to find Adam in the kitchen, pouring coffee with hands that weren't entirely steady either. Are you all right? She asked, noting the unusual pallor beneath his weathered tan. Adam looked up, his expression a complex mixture of relief, residual anger, and something deeper. Thanks to you, he said quietly. That was quick thinking, Ruby, brave too. I was terrified, she admitted, accepting the cup he offered. I thought they might shoot you. So did I for a moment. Adam's hand brushed hers as he passed the coffee. Having you here probably saved my life, or at least prevented a more violent confrontation. Barton entered the kitchen, interrupting the moment. They're really gone, he reported. Checked the boundary, heading west by their tracks. Adam nodded. Good. Let's hope they keep going. He turned to Ruby. You should rest. It's barely dawn and you've had a disturbed night. I think we all have, she replied, suddenly aware that she was standing in the kitchen in her nightclothes, a robe hastily pulled over them. I'll change and prepare breakfast. None of us will sleep now anyway. As she turned to leave, Adam caught her arm gently. Ruby, he said, his voice low enough that Barton couldn't hear. Thank you. The simple words carried a weight of emotion that made her breath catch. For a brief moment, his fingers tightened on her arm, a gesture that seemed to communicate everything he wasn't saying aloud. Then he released her, stepping back to a proper distance. The incident with Murphy and his men changed something fundamental at Silverpine. A new awareness existed between Ruby and Adam, a recognition that they had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Barton noticed the shift, watching them with narrowed eyes when they spoke together or worked side by side on ranch accounts in the evening. 2 weeks after Murphy's departure, Barton approached Adam as he worked in the barn. Ruby, gathering eggs nearby, overheard their conversation through the open barn door. Been thinking, Barton began casually. Spring's coming soon. You'll be bringing in cattle, hiring more hands. That's the plan, Adam agreed, not looking up from the saddle he was repairing. Thing is, Barton continued, having a single woman living on a ranch with a bunch of cowboys won't work. Men talk, get ideas, especially about a pretty girl like Miss Thompson. Adam's hand stilled. Miss Thompson's position here isn't your concern, Barton. Just looking out for the ranch's interests, Barton pressed. And yours. Town's already talking about you two out here alone all winter. Adam stood slowly, facing Barton directly. What exactly are you implying? Barton raised his hands in a placating gesture. Nothing against you or the girl, just saying appearances matter. Respectable rancher like yourself needs to consider his reputation. My reputation, Adam repeated flatly, not Miss Thompson's. Well, hers too, of course, Barton backtracked. Just thought you should know what folks are saying. Mrs. Wilson in town was asking questions when I rode in for mail last week. Seemed concerned about the girl's situation out here. Ruby's hands tightened around the basket of eggs she held. So town was gossiping about her living at Silverpine. She should have expected as much. Black Hawk had always thrived on rumors and speculation about its residents. Adam's voice carried clearly as he responded to Barton. "I appreciate your concern, misplaced as it is. Miss Thompson's employment here is entirely proper and will remain so." Course, Barton nodded. "Unless you were considering making it more permanent. Girl like that would make someone a good wife. Educated, hardworking. If you're not interested, might be others who would be." The implication was clear enough to make Ruby's cheeks burn. Barton was suggesting himself as a potential suitor, while simultaneously threatening the spread of gossip if rejected. It was a clumsy attempt at manipulation, but effective in its way. Adam's response was cold and precise. "Miss Thompson's personal life is her own business. She's free to make whatever choices suit her. As are you, Barton, including the choice to leave Silverpine if you find the arrangements here unsuitable." The veiled threat silenced Barton momentarily. Ruby moved away quickly, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. She returned to the house, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Part of her was indignant at being discussed, as though she were property to be claimed. Another part was warmed by Adam's defense of her autonomy. That evening, as Ruby prepared dinner, Adam entered the kitchen with a serious expression. "I need to speak with you," he said without preamble. "About a conversation I had with Barton today." Ruby kept her focus on the stew she was stirring. "I overheard some of it," she admitted. "About town gossip." Adam sighed, leaning against the counter beside her. "I suspected as much. I'm sorry you had to hear that." "It's not your fault," Ruby replied, trying to sound unconcerned. "Small towns always talk. It doesn't matter." "It matters if it damages your reputation," Adam countered. "If you'd prefer to return to town—" "Is that what you want?" Ruby interrupted, finally looking up at him. "For me to leave?" "No," Adam answered immediately, his voice firm. "That's the last thing I want. But I need to consider what's best for you." Ruby set down her spoon with deliberate care. "Then perhaps you should ask me what I want, rather than deciding for me." Adam studied her face, his blue eyes serious. "You're right. What do you want, Ruby?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. What did she want? To stay at Silverpine, certainly. To continue working with Adam, watching the ranch transform under their combined efforts. But more than that, she wanted the unspoken thing growing between them to be acknowledged, to discover if the feelings developing in her heart were reciprocated. "I want to stay," she said simply. "I've never been happier than I've been here, despite Murphy and town gossips and even Barton's insinuations." Relief washed over Adam's face. "Good, that's good," he hesitated, then added quietly. "I can't imagine Silverpine without you now." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate fully. Ruby's heart pounded as Adam moved slightly closer, his hand coming to rest beside hers on the counter. "Ruby," he began, his voice lower than usual, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I started to say that day in the old cabin before we were interrupted." Ruby held her breath, afraid to break the moment. "Yes." Adam's eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "My feelings for you have grown beyond what an employer should feel for an employee. I've tried to maintain proper distance to respect your position, but the back door slammed open and Barton burst into the kitchen. "Ryder's coming," he announced, oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "Look like Murphy's gang again, and they've brought friends." Adam's expression transformed instantly from tender to alert. "How many?" "At least 8, Barton reported grimly. "Armed, moving fast." Adam turned to Ruby, all personal matters set aside. "Get upstairs, away from windows. Take my revolver." I'm not hiding while you face them, Ruby protested. I can help. Ruby, please. Adam's voice was urgent. These aren't thieves looking for horses, they're coming back for revenge. It's going to be dangerous. Barton nodded in agreement. Girl's got spirit, Lawson, but Murphy won't hesitate to harm a woman. Better she stays out of sight. For once, Ruby had to acknowledge Barton was right. She would be more hindrance than help in a direct confrontation. Be careful, she urged Adam, touching his arm briefly before hurrying upstairs. From her position at Adam's bedroom window, Ruby could see the approaching riders, Murphy in the lead, with 7 hard-looking men following. They thundered into the yard, spreading out to surround the house in a practiced maneuver that spoke of experience with such confrontations. Adam and Barton stepped onto the porch, weapons ready but not raised. Murphy dismounted, his scarred face twisted in an ugly smile. Told you you'd made enemies, Lawson, he called. Come to collect on that debt. There is no debt, Adam replied steadily. You tried to steal from me. I let you leave with your lives and supplies. We're even. Murphy laughed, an unpleasant sound. That's not how I see it. You humiliated me in front of my men. Now I'm going to return the favor. He gestured to the house. Nice place you're fixing up. Be a shame if something happened to it. Or to that pretty little lady you're keeping here. Ruby's breath caught at the threat. Adam's posture stiffened, but his voice remained controlled. My quarrel is with you, Murphy, not with anyone else. If you want satisfaction, face me directly. Oh, I plan to, Murphy assured him. But first, I think we'll help ourselves to whatever supplies you've got. Maybe enjoy your hospitality for a few days. His meaning was clear. They intended to take over the ranch, potentially harming anyone who stood in their way. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Ruby could barely process it. Barton suddenly raised his rifle, not at Murphy, but at Adam. Sorry, Lawson, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Made a deal while in town. Murphy gets the ranch, I get foreman position when he sells it. The betrayal was stunning. Adam froze momentarily, caught between threats from both sides. Murphy laughed again, clearly enjoying the situation. Should have listened when he told you to send the girl away. Might have saved yourself some trouble. Ruby's mind raced. Adam was outnumbered and now betrayed by his own ranch hand. Without thinking of her own safety, she opened the window and aimed the revolver at Barton. Drop the rifle, she called, her voice steadier than she felt. All eyes turned upward. Barton hesitated, clearly surprised by her intervention. It was all the time Adam needed. In one fluid motion, he ducked and drew his pistol, firing at Murphy while diving for cover behind a water trough. Chaos erupted in the yard. Murphy's men scattered, taking positions behind wagons and fence posts. Barton, momentarily distracted by Ruby, failed to react quickly enough. Adam's second shot caught him in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward off the porch. Ruby ducked back from the window as bullets splintered the frame. Heart pounding, she tried to assess the situation. Adam was pinned down behind inadequate cover, outnumbered by Murphy's gang. Barton was wounded but still dangerous, his allegiance clearly with the outlaws. A desperate plan formed in her mind. The back stairs led to the kitchen. If she could reach the cellar door unseen, she might be able to circle around behind the barn, creating a distraction that could help Adam. Moving carefully to avoid creaking floorboards, Ruby made her way down the back stairs. The sounds of gunfire continued outside, sporadic but intense. Through the kitchen window, she could see 2 of Murphy's men attempting to flank Adam's position. The cellar door was just past the pantry. Ruby crouched low, keeping out of sight of the windows as she made her way toward it. Just as her hand reached for the handle, the back door burst open. She whirled, raising the revolver, to find herself face to face with Barton. Blood soaked his left shoulder, but his right hand held his pistol steady, aimed directly at her. "Should have stayed upstairs, girl," he growled. "Why, Barton?" Ruby demanded, keeping her own weapon leveled at him. "Adam gave you work when you needed it. Why betray him?" "Money," Barton answered simply. "Murphy's got backers who want this land, rich men from Denver. They're planning a railroad spur through here. Land'll be worth 10 times what Lawson paid once that news gets out." Ruby's mind worked rapidly. If she could keep Barton talking, perhaps Adam would realize she'd left her position upstairs. "So you made a deal to help Murphy take the ranch by force. That's murder, Barton." "Just business," he countered, though a flicker of something, perhaps doubt, crossed his face. Lawson wouldn't sell willingly, too stubborn, too attached to this worthless patch of dirt, and to you. He gestured with his pistol. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." Ruby's finger tightened on the trigger. "I know how to use this," she warned. "My father taught me well." Barton's expression hardened. "Last chance, girl. Drop it," or a shot rang out from the doorway behind Barton. He crumpled forward, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the floor as he fell. Adam stood in the doorway, blood streaming from a graze on his temple, but his aim steady. "Ruby," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, shock making it difficult to speak. "Murphy's men running," Adam informed her, moving to check that Barton was no longer a threat. The betrayer lay motionless on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath him. "I hit Murphy. Not fatally, but enough to convince them the price was too high." Ruby stared at Barton's still form, the reality of what had happened slowly sinking in. Adam gently took the revolver from her shaking hands. "It's over," he assured her. "They're gone." The aftermath of the confrontation left Silverpine in disarray. Barton was dead, and though Murphy and his men had fled, Adam was certain they would alert authorities with a version of events that painted themselves as victims. They needed to reach town first with the truth. "We have to go to Black Hawk immediately," Adam decided as he bandaged his temple wound. "Report what happened to the sheriff before Murphy can spread lies." Ruby nodded, still processing the violence she'd witnessed. "What about Barton?" "We'll have to bring him," Adam said grimly, "as evidence of what happened here." They worked quickly, wrapping Barton's body and securing it in the wagon. Within an hour they were on the road to Black Hawk, the journey made in tense silence. Ruby's mind replayed the confrontation repeatedly, Barton's betrayal, the gunfire, Adam's timely arrival that had saved her life. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the silence, "for coming back for me." Adam glanced at her, his expression softening from its grim concentration. "When I realized you'd left the bedroom, I nearly lost my mind with worry, seeing you facing down Barton." He shook his head. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Ruby Thompson." "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I couldn't stay hidden while you were in danger." Adam's hand found hers on the wagon seat, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt like both comfort and promise. "When this is over," he said quietly, "we need to finish the conversation," Barton interrupted. Sheriff Mills in Black Hawk listened to their account with growing concern. Murphy was known to him a troublemaker with connections to organized criminal elements in Denver. Barton's body and the bullet wounds Adam had sustained supported their version of events. "I'll telegraph the county marshal," Mills promised. "Murphy and his gang won't get far." As for this railroad business Barton mentioned, he frowned thoughtfully. "There have been rumors about new lines being planned. Land speculation is running wild." "You might have more trouble on your hands, Lawson, if your ranch is really in the path of a proposed route." Adam's jaw tightened. "Silverpine is not for sale, not to railroad men, not to anyone." The sheriff nodded. "I'll note that officially. Should help if anyone else tries similar tactics." He looked between Adam and Ruby. "Miss Thompson, you should probably stay in town tonight. Mrs. Wilson would be happy to have you at the boarding house, I'm sure." Before Ruby could respond, Adam spoke firmly. "Ruby stays with me. We return to Silverpine together." Sheriff Mills raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "As you wish. I'll send deputies out tomorrow to check on things and gather any additional evidence." News of the confrontation at Silverpine spread quickly through Black Hawk. By the time Adam and Ruby had given their statements, purchased supplies to replace what had been damaged, and prepared to return to the ranch, curious townspeople were gathering to catch a glimpse of them. Ruby felt their stares as she sat beside Adam in the wagon, some curious, some disapproving, some openly sympathetic. Mrs. Wilson pushed through the small crowd to reach them. "Ruby Thompson, when I heard what happened." The older woman clasped Ruby's hands tightly. "Are you truly all right, dear?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Wilson," Ruby assured her. "Thanks to Adam." Mrs. Wilson studied her face, then glanced at Adam. Something in her expression shifted subtly. "I see," she said, a knowing tone in her voice. "Well, you take care of each other out there, and don't worry about what people say. Life's too short for that nonsense." The ride back to Silverpine was quieter than the journey into town, both Adam and Ruby lost in their own thoughts. The events of the day had changed things between them, facing danger together, defending each other, choosing to return to the ranch as a united front rather than separating in town. As the familiar buildings of Silverpine came into view, Ruby felt a surprising sense of homecoming. Despite the violence that had occurred there just hours earlier, the ranch represented safety and possibility to her now. Adam stopped the wagon in front of the main house, turning to Ruby before either of them moved to get down. "Ruby," he began, his voice serious, "before we go inside, there's something I need to say." She met his gaze, heart quickening at the intensity in his blue eyes. "Yes. Today made me realize how quickly everything can change, how easily I could have lost you." Adam took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses from months of ranch work. "I started to tell you earlier before Murphy arrived that my feelings for you have grown far beyond what they should be between employer and employee." Ruby's breath caught. "Mine too," she admitted softly. Adam's face brightened with hope. "Really?" she nodded, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. "I've felt it growing for weeks, but I thought it was inappropriate that you wouldn't want." "I want," Adam interrupted, his voice low and fervent. "Ruby, I want everything with you. A partnership, a future." He hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "I know it's sudden, perhaps even improper after everything that's happened today, but I find I can't wait any longer to ask, would you consider becoming my wife?" The proposal, so unexpected yet so perfectly right, left Ruby momentarily speechless. In the silence, doubt crept into Adam's expression. "I understand if you need time to consider," he added quickly. "Or if you'd prefer a more traditional courtship." Ruby found her voice at last. "Yes," she said simply, a smile blooming across her face. "Yes, Adam Lawson, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his features was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. Adam leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "May I?" he murmured. In response, Ruby closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Adam's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. "I've wanted to do that since the day you stood up to me in the saloon," he confessed, opening his eyes to gaze at her with undisguised adoration. Ruby laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years despite the day's trauma. "Even when I was sweeping floors and looking a mess." "Especially then," Adam confirmed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You were so fierce, so determined. I knew you were something special." They might have remained there longer, lost in newfound intimacy, had the sun not begun to set, reminding them of practical considerations. Together, they unloaded the wagon and entered the house, now truly their house, in a way it hadn't been before. The kitchen still showed signs of the confrontation. Barton's blood had been hastily cleaned but left a dark stain on the wooden floor. Adam frowned at the sight. "We'll replace those boards tomorrow," he promised. "Make it like it never happened." Ruby shook her head. "We can't erase what happened, Adam, but we can move forward from it, make Silverpine the place we always saw it could be." Adam's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "We will," he promised. "Together." Spring arrived at Silverpine with a burst of green across the valley and the promise of new beginnings. The ranch transformed under Adam and Ruby's combined efforts. Fences repaired, buildings restored, fields prepared for the cattle that would arrive from Texas in late April. The old cabin in the clearing became their special retreat, lovingly restored as a memorial to the ranch's history, and a symbol of their own fresh start. Ruby's proposed wedding date of May was deemed too far away by Adam, who arranged with the town minister to visit Silverpine in mid-March. They were married in the newly repaired main house, with Mrs. Wilson and Sheriff Mills as witnesses, along with a few trusted neighbors from surrounding ranches. Ruby wore a simple blue dress ordered specially from Denver, and Adam looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, culminating in a kiss that prompted a cheer from their small gathering of guests. "Mrs. Lawson," Adam whispered against her ear as they greeted well-wishers afterward. "Has a nice sound to it, don't you think?" Ruby smiled up at her husband, the word still new and wonderful in her mind. "The best sound I've ever heard," she agreed. News from Sheriff Mills confirmed that Murphy and most of his gang had been captured by the county marshal. The railroad speculation Barton had mentioned proved true. A spur line was indeed planned for the region, but the proposed route ran through the valley west of Silverpine, not through their property. The rumor had been started deliberately to drive up land prices and create opportunities for unscrupulous speculation. By April, as promised, Adam brought in a small herd of cattle, the first of many that would eventually make Silverpine one of the most successful ranches in the county. With the arrival of the cattle came ranch hands, honest, hard-working men carefully selected by Adam for their skills and character. Ruby continued to manage the house and accounts, but now as the ranch's mistress rather than its employee. The men respected her authority and soon learned that Mrs. Lawson's cooking and fair treatment were among the best reasons to seek employment at Silverpine. One warm evening in late June, Ruby and Adam sat on the newly rebuilt porch, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. Adam's arm was draped comfortably around her shoulders, his presence as essential to her now as breathing. "I've been thinking," she said, nestling closer against his side, "about last winter and how we met." Adam smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, offering you that job. For both of us," Ruby agreed. "I was working myself to exhaustion with those 3 jobs, barely surviving. And then you appeared with your offer of one job, better pay. And a husband as an unexpected bonus," Adam added with a chuckle. "Though I hope you consider that part worthwhile." Ruby turned her face up to his, eyes sparkling with happiness. "More than worthwhile, essential." She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Especially now." Adam froze, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning wonder. "Ruby, are you saying?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday when he came to check on Jenkins' broken arm. "We're going to have a baby, Adam. By winter, there will be 3 of us at Silverpine." The look of pure joy that transformed Adam's face was everything Ruby had hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ruby marveled at how completely her life had changed in just 7 months. Last December, she had been a desperate young woman working 3 jobs just to survive winter in Black Hawk. Now she was Ruby Lawson, mistress of Silverpine Ranch, beloved wife, and soon-to-be mother. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Ruby smiled, contentment warming her from within. "That sometimes the hardest winters lead to the most beautiful springs," she answered, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "And that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Adam's arms tightened around her, his kiss a promise of all the years to come. "Welcome home, Ruby," he whispered against her lips. "Welcome home." In the years that followed, Silverpine Ranch flourished beyond even Adam's ambitious dreams. Their son, James, was born that winter, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, followed by another son 3 years after that. Ruby never returned to working 3 jobs for mere survival. Instead, she poured her considerable energy and intelligence into one job that became her life's purpose, building Silverpine into not just a successful ranch, but a true home for the family she and Adam created together. And on cold winter evenings, when snow blanketed the valley and the wind howled around their sturdy home, Ruby would often think back to that fateful day in Black Hawk when a tall stranger had offered her 1 job instead of 3. A simple proposition that had changed everything. A beginning disguised as merely a better wage, the best beginning she could have ever imagined.